Hello to everyone and welcome to today's cloud coaching session. I am Violeta. Together with me, there is Liana and my colleague Tom. We will be your hosts for this session. So what you will actually going to see today would be an overview of the Canary and Blue-Green Deployment Pipeline. So you will learn what is DevOps Cloud Service and how it can help you. What's new with this new release? What is, of course, Blue-Green deployment and Canary deployment, and then we will jump into a demo. So you will see how this service will help you. And now it's time to invite Liana. Liana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Violeta, very much for the introduction, and welcome everyone to this session. So let's take a quick look at the agenda for today and what we'll be covering. If we could go to the next slide, please, Violeta. Thank you so much. Yeah. So first of all, we'll chat a bit about what the Oracle DevOps Cloud Service is, the pricing that is involved. We'll see a workflow example and speak a bit about the architecture, check out what's new in the Oracle DevOps service. Maybe you haven't seen like the latest news and additions to the service. So we'll take a very quick look at that. Then we'll get right into the new deployment strategies. Well, I say new, but they're available since pretty much this summer, around, I believe, June or July. And then after we discuss a bit about the Blue-Green and Canary deployments and how they're implemented in the Oracle DevOps Cloud Service, we will take a quick look at the infrastructure dashboard, get into the console and see how we can create these stages and what kind of options are available to us. So if we could move on to the next slide, we'll just chat a bit about what Oracle DevOps Cloud Service is. So as you can probably already imagine by the name, it is a continuous integration and continuous delivery platform, which helps you automate your software development cycle. It enables you to do collaboration on development, building, testing, and deployment of software. So you get visibility across the full development lifecycle. And you can also see in each of the phases, a history of each deployment, build, and test that you have done. So this service can be accessed by using our browser-based interface, which is the console available at cloud.oracle.com. You can use the command line interface if you have OCI CLI installed on your laptop or computer, or you can use the REST APIs. So all of these different options allow you to do basically the same thing, but you may want to access the service differently based on your needs. So you've got like 3 different options to access it. So now let's quickly move on to the pricing of the service. So basically this service is completely free to use. However, you will be charged for the underlying resources that are used while running, for example, the build runner. You would be charged for the OCPU and for the memory that is used when running your build pipeline. As well, obviously, the object storage, if you are using the integrated code repository and you are not connecting to any external code repository. And for deployments, you will be only charged for the resources that you use to deploy. So for example, if you use compute instances, logs, notifications, that's pretty much it. So the service is free to use in itself. Now, if we move on to a workflow example, here you can see a very basic example of how a workflow would look like in a specific Oracle Cloud Infrastructure region. So basically, the service allows you to create private code repositories to store and manage your source code. If you would rather connect to an external repository that you already have, you can connect to GitHub, you can connect to GitLab, to Bitbucket Cloud, Visual Builder Studio, Bitbucket Server, and GitLab servers. So there is quite a large number of external repository integrations available. You are also capable of building and testing your latest changes in a build pipeline, and the build runner is service managed. You can set up triggers to automatically run your build pipelines from a source code commit or from a pull request. You can optionally run deployment pipelines on a successful build to have a complete CICD automation in place. You can also orchestrate your software deployment across regions to OCI platforms. And what we support right now in the DevOps Cloud Service is Container Engine for Kubernetes, also known as OKE, which you can see in the workflow example here, as well as compute instances, and Oracle Functions, which is our implementation of serverless architecture. It also permits you to avoid downtime during deployments through the use of the blue, green, and canary deployment strategies, which we'll get into a bit later. You can automate the complexity of updating your applications because automation reduces the chance of human error that might introduce security vulnerabilities. And it also allows you to enhance your security, reduce risk in delivery, because it enables faster software delivery, and security bugs can be resolved quickly by rolling out a fix. So these are kind of like the generic usage examples of the DevOps Cloud Service. So now let's move on to what is new within the service. So I'm covering here from March to November, just like the biggest changes that were introduced. If you want to see all of them, if you go to docs.oracle.com and select the DevOps Cloud Service documentation, you can see there all the release notes for every new release that was deployed to the service. So we've got a new vulnerability audit. We have implemented Helm chart support. So now you can deploy Helm charts to Container Engine for Kubernetes to your cluster. Like I mentioned, Bitbucket Cloud is supported now, so you can mirror your Bitbucket Cloud repositories to use them in the build pipeline. We also have recently added GraalVM Enterprise in the build pipelines. If you want to check out how to use that with GraalVM. And the latest one, the latest update, supports integration with Visual Builder Studio repositories. So you can mirror those and initiate manual or triggered builds for your commits on a VBS repository. Now, let us move on to the topic of today's webinar, Cloud Coaching, and check out the deployment strategies that we're going to be talking about. So first of all, a little bit about the blue-green deployment. As you can see, it's a deployment strategy in which you create two separate but identical environments. One environment, which is called the blue environment, runs the current application version, so let's call it 1.1. And the other environment, which is called the green environment, runs the new application version 1.2. So using this strategy, it allows you to increase your application availability and reduce risks by simplifying the rollback process if a deployment fails. So once you have completed your test of the new version of the application on the green environment, which would be version 1.2 in our example, the live application traffic would be directed to the green environment, and the blue environment, which contains version 1.1, becomes deprecated. So in the following slide, we can see the way this works, all the stages in a blue-green deployment strategy. So it's implemented in 4 stages, out of which 2 are optional. The blue-green deployment stage here is where the 2 environments, which would be instance groups, so compute instances or clusters, Oracle Container Engine for Kubernetes clusters, are selected along with the artifacts that you want to deploy. A load balancer is then selected for the instance group blue-green traffic shift. If you do a Kubernetes deployment, you would set up an Nginx ingress controller at this stage. for routing the traffic between the two environments. So during the deployment run, the new version of the application is deployed to the standby environment. The optional stage, which invokes a function, is a stage where you can add a custom serverless function to the pipeline to validate the application on your standby environment. So this function would test the new version before shifting the production traffic from the blue environment to the green environment. So from your active environment to the standby one. Another optional stage is the manual approval stage. This step is added to approve the deployment in the standby environment before shifting the production traffic. So if you want to add manual approvals, you can do so here. Once this has been approved, we will move to the traffic shift stage. And in this stage, after your deployment is validated on your standby environment, 100% of the production traffic will be shifted from the current active environment, which is the blue one, to the standby environment, which is the green one, that runs the new validated version of the application. And like I mentioned before, after this is completed, your blue environment, so the old active environment, will be deprecated. Now let's talk a bit about deployment rollbacks. So the blue-green deployment strategy does not support pipeline redeployment for both instance group and OKE. You can only do single-stage redeployment through manual rollback. So in the single-stage redeployment process, after your deployment is complete, you can roll back the failed stage to the previous successful release. And you've got here an example. During an instance group blue-green deployment, if your new version fails, then the production traffic that points to this environment is shifted to the standby environment, so to blue or to an earlier production. Now let's look at the Canary deployment strategy. This is a strategy that allows you to release your application or your service incrementally to a subset of users. So all the infrastructure in your target environment is updated in small phases. Like you can see in the example, you can first release it to 10%, then to 25%, to 75%, and then 100% of your users. A Canary release is the lowest risk-prone strategy compared to all the others because it allows you this kind of control. So let's take a more in-depth look at the Canary deployment stages. So this is implemented again in 5 stages, out of which 1 is optional. So first of all, in the Canary deployment stage, a Canary environment, and again, we're talking about instance groups, so compute instances, or Oracle Container Engine for Kubernetes, so your Kubernetes cluster. You would select this environment along with the artifacts that you want to deploy. For an instance group traffic shift, you need to select a load balancer. For an OKE deployment, again, like before, you need to set up an Nginx ingress controller to route the traffic. So during this deployment run, the new version of the application is deployed to the Canary environment. In the optional invoke function stage, again, like before in the blue-green deployment strategy, you can add a custom function to the pipeline to validate the deployment in your Canary environment. So the invoke function would test the new version before moving to production. The shift traffic stage, this is where part of the production traffic is shifted to the Canary environment. And what we allow right now in the DevOps service is you can shift between 0% and 25% of your traffic to this Canary environment. So a maximum of 25% of your traffic can be shifted here. Then we have the manual approval stage, which is not optional in this strategy. It is a mandatory stage where you need to approve the deployment in the Canary environment before deploying your application to the production environment. So then we go to the production stage, where you need to select an instance group or a cluster. And then the application that is validated in the Canary environment will be deployed to the production environment during the deployment run. And now let's take a look at what the rollback looks like in this strategy. You can do pipeline redeployment for both instance group and Kubernetes clusters. You can opt to automatically roll back the deployment to the last successful version in case your production stage fails. And again, single stage redeployment here is not supported for Canary deployment or for traffic shift or for the approval stages. So now, with that in mind, we have covered pretty much everything on the information side. So we can switch to having a look at OCI and see what kind of options we have when defining these stages and what they look like in our DevOps projects. So I'm going to be sharing my screen now. And here you can see my cloud console, where I am connected to an environment on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And to go to our DevOps projects, you can either click on the menu and go to Developer Services and DevOps, or if you have pinned it here, you would have it here, or if you have recently visited it, you can see it in the service links here. So once we click here, we move to the DevOps service, and once you select your compartment and also filter by start and end date, you can see all the projects that have been created within that compartment. So as you can see, I have more than one project, some for instance groups, some for Kubernetes. So let's take a look at, for example, I already have created the stages in this instance group deployment, so we can look at the deployment strategies and what they look like. So in here, once you go to your project, you open your project, you can see an overview of it. And then here you've got the options for those of you who are unfamiliar with DevOps service and are seeing it for the first time, to add code repositories or external connections to code repositories. You can define your build pipelines here. You can see your build history, define your deployment pipelines and see your deployments and check the logs. This is also where you define your environments, which can be, like I mentioned, in general. So not only for Blue, Green, and Canary, which only support instance groups and OKE. You can also add environments on Oracle Functions if you just do a standard rolling deployment. And then we've got the artifacts resources, which artifacts can be, like I mentioned, because we also added Helm charts. They can also be Helm charts. They can be your Kubernetes manifests, your container images, your Docker containers, and so on and so forth. Let's see if it loads in a timely manner. Right, so these would be referenced in your deployment to your target environment, right? You need to specify the artifacts that you wish to deploy. And these come, either you can add them here manually, or they can come from your build pipeline once you trigger a build. So like I mentioned, this can be container images, generic artifacts, and or Helm charts. So here you can see, for example, a generic artifact, which is a script. Right, so then you've got external connections. If you want to do any external connection to a repository, to GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, Cloud, and so on, this is where you would do it. And this is also where you define your triggers if you want to automatically run a build pipeline on matching events like commits. So going back to the project overview, we can also see all of these options right here in the main window. Once we click on overview, you would see all of them. So you can quickly access them from here as well. So let's take a look at the deployment pipelines. And then I will show you another example where I also have a build pipeline set up, and that one runs on deploys on Kubernetes. So let's take a look first at the blue-green pipeline. So once you create a new pipeline or open an existing one, you will see this small plus button, which you can click to add stages. So once you click on add stage, you can select, because obviously here we are in the deployment pipeline interface. You can only see the deployment stages that can be added. So here is where you would select, where you would select your blue-green strategy or canary strategy. And these are the other deployment strategies that are available. For example, if you would simply wish to apply a manifest to your Kubernetes cluster, if you want to do a rolling deployment to an instance group on compute instance groups, if you want to do a deployment on functions, or the latest addition, which is installing a Helm chart on the Kubernetes cluster, right? So this is where you would select them. And here is also where you've got the control stages, where you would pause for approval. If you want to use a timer for testing your pipeline, you can add a wait stage, and then the traffic shift, where you would route traffic between two environments. And of course, if you want to invoke a function to test the code that you have built, you can also integrate custom logic through a serverless function. So let's take a look at the blue-green deployment. So if you already have one created, you can see the configuration here, or we will take a look at when we create a new one, what it looks like. So if you want to check the details, you would click on View Details. Here you've got a summary of the strategy details, and this is also where you can edit the stage. Actually, let's take a look at how we create one from the ground up, because I think that would be easier. So let's create a new pipeline and call it blue-green test deployment. When you create your new pipeline, like I mentioned, you can add stages. There is no stage added by default, so you need to add your stage, and we will select the blue-green strategy. So here is where we would use our two identical environments for the deployment. We need to give it a name, so let's just call it deployment. Then we need to select our deployment set. So first of all, the first one you select is the currently deployed active environment, and then environment B is the environment, rollback environment. So you would select the second one, right? And then you would need to select your deployment configuration. This is where you select the artifact that has come out of the build stage. In our case here, it is a deployment configuration for an instance group. So we select our instance group. You can add additional artifacts if you wish to in this stage. Then we need to select our load balancer, like I mentioned before. Because we are in an instance type deployment, we need to select our load balancer. These are all the load balancers that I've got available, and I'll select this one, which has been created for this project. Then you need to select your listener, which is a configuration that comes from the load balancer, where we've got defined a listener on running on TCP and port 80. You'll select that, and then your backend port, which will put in 88 here. And then the rollout policy here can be done by percentage, between 1 and 100, or by count. So let's say, for example, we want to do it by percentage, and we want to roll out like 50%, and the delay between batches 60 seconds. This is optional, so you if you don't select it, I think the default is 60, if I'm not mistaken. So then you can also select the failure policy, where you would fail by percentage or count, or select none if you don't want to configure it. But assuming you want to roll back in case of failure, you would put here the percentage. And let's say if 10% is failure, we want to roll back. And then we've got the validation controls. This is where you can run your custom logic through a function if you want to validate the rollout. And this is also where you can optionally enable approval controls. If you enable it, you need to give it a name and a description, and select how many approvers should approve it before moving forward. And for the validation controls, again, you would need to give it a name. And then I don't have any environment available where I have Oracle functions, but if you would have a function and had created an environment for it, you would see it available here and select your function. You can also select to run the stage synchronously or asynchronously. So that is it for the configuration. And now we've got our deployment and the traffic shift all done. If we want to run it, we would just click on Run Pipeline here. Again, this can also be triggered if you trigger a build and you have selected in your build stage to trigger a deployment at the end, which we'll see a bit later. Now, let's take a look at Canary. And I'll create a new pipeline here, which I'll call Canary Test Deployment. So again, this looks exactly the same, only we select this time the Canary strategy. So once we click on Next, we need to give it a name. Then we need to select our Canary environment. Again, we need to select one of the available environments that we've got, and I'll just select this environment here, which this environment basically contains a collection of instances, or in case it is a Kubernetes cluster, you will see your cluster here. So what this environment is a collection of compute instances, or a group of instances. Then again, we need to select our artifact, which, since we're on instance, it is a deployment configuration. Again, we need to select our load balancer and listener. So I'll just quickly select the load balancer and the TCP listener on port 80. Add the backend port. And again, the instance rollout by percentage or by count. So if we select, let's select percentage again and put 50% and 60. And move on to the next page. Here you've got your validation controls if you want to run, again, the custom logic. We don't, so we'll move forward. And then the traffic shift, stage, where you can see here the ramp limit. So let me just give it a name first. And then we can look at the ramp limit. So this is the ramp limit in percentage to specify the maximum traffic to be shifted to this Canary environment. So this must be between 1 and 25, like I mentioned before. If you set it to 20, then 20% of your traffic will be shifted to the Canary environment. So yeah, let's set it to 20. And click on Next. Then we've got the approval stage, which is mandatory here. Let's call this approval, and we'll leave one approvers in. And then the production Canary. So let's call this one production. We need to select our production environment. Here you've got the option to automatically, like I mentioned before in the presentation, to automatically roll back to your last successful version in case of failure. So we can just check that and it will do it for us. And again, we've got our rollout policy. So let's just set it to 50% and 60 seconds between batches. And with this, we have created a Canary deployment strategy. And again, if we click on view details here, we can see everything, and we can edit if we, made a mistake or want to add additional artifacts and stuff like that. We can do that here. If you want to see the deployments that were done, should you do a run on the pipeline, you would see all the deployments here. And you'll see, the name of the deployment, the status, the duration, and the timestamp, and you would also be able to check the logs. So taking a look at a separate project, which is set up for Kubernetes, we've got a project which deploys a sample Node.js application to a Kubernetes cluster, which I believe is this one. Let's see. here I'll be able to show you a bit more of the interface, right? So we've got a code repository, which is just cloned from an example sample application provided by Oracle, which you can find on GitHub if you so wish. And you can also, if you've got a trial account, you can also use Terraform. Most of these reference architectures or GitHub examples that are available on the official Oracle GitHub also have Terraform configurations that you can just directly run on your trial account or on your tenant if you're not running in a trial version, and you can just deploy everything and then play with it yourself. So this is the code repository that we've got. It tells us here whether it's mirrored or not. So mine isn't, and when we click on it, we can also see the code, right? So this comes from getting started with OCI DevOps, which is available on the Oracle GitHub. So yeah, this is our code here, right? We can see our commits, the branches, the files and all that. So oops, excuse me, I just hit my microphone by mistake. Sorry for that if you had a loud noise. Then moving back to the projects, we can check out our build pipeline for this project. Here we've got a build pipeline created that builds a source code. So let's take a look at how this is done. So we've got two here. One is a test, one is the actual one, let's say. So this is the build pipeline. As you can see, this is a managed build. Then we deliver our artifacts and then we trigger the deployment. So this was what I mentioned before. If you want to just automatically trigger a deployment once you finish building, you can just add a stage of type trigger deployment here. And this build pipeline, you can start it manually or you can start it with an external trigger, like from a commit. So let's take a look at this stage here. So pretty much, we select the architecture on which we want to build our application. This is the basic container image for Oracle Linux 7 that we used. If you want to specify a separate build spec, you can do it here. Otherwise, it takes build_spec.yaml from your code. And then we have selected our code repository here, which is the one that we've got, we saw before. And we're taking main as a branch. You can also add additional build sources if you want. And the timeout, I haven't changed it. It's the default one. So this is pretty much the configuration of a build stage. Then we need to deliver our artifacts, which in our case, it will be a Docker container running our Node.js application. So here in this stage, we have selected our artifact. You can see the path is to frankfurt.oraclecontainerinfrastructureregistry.io because we are building this container from the source code that we've seen before, and it's saved in the container registry, the integrated container registry. Then we need to associate our artifact with a build result, and our Docker image has the name output01. And this is pretty much this stage. And then once we select to trigger a deployment, we select the deployment pipeline, and here we see all the deployment pipelines that exist in this project, and we've got a blue-green pipeline and the standard raw pipeline. So for this build pipeline, the standard one is selected. I have a separate build pipeline where we're deploying to a blue-green deployment strategy. So here you also see, you can also send your parameters, which are, the namespace, which is example, and then the artifacts, which is our Kubernetes manifest that we will be using to deploy our container. Let's take a look at this artifact. If we go back to our project. So the container image is created when we run the build, and the Kubernetes artifact was added manually by clicking on Add Artifact here. And it's this, the Kubernetes manifest. And here you can see the manifest. And you can also edit it inline if you want to. So once you add an artifact, if you select the type Kubernetes manifest, you can edit it inline. So the types of artifacts that you can add are a container image repository, an instance group deployment configuration, which we have seen in the previous project, just a general artifact, a Kubernetes manifest, or more recently, a Helm chart. So this is our manifest for the deployment of the node getting started application. So we do a deployment, and then we deploy a service as well, a type load balancer. So we have selected this artifact during the deployment pipeline, so we can deploy our container. So if we check the other build pipelines, we will see that it would trigger the other deployment, which is the blue-green deployment. So going back here and selecting the test, we will see that here we've got a stage that is called BG deployment, and here the deployment pipeline selected is the blue-green pipeline. So if we take a look at how the pipeline is created when we want to run on a container engine for Kubernetes and not on instances. So let's go to the pipelines here and check out the blue-green pipeline. So let's just call it test pipeline. And here we can add a stage for the blue-green strategy and the deployment type, right? So now we want to switch to Oracle Container Engine for Kubernetes. So we select OK. And this looks a bit different now, right? So we've got deployment. We need to select our environment. And we'll take a look at environments as well, so you can see how those are defined. And then we need to select the two namespaces, right? One namespace will be used for the blue environment, and namespace B will be used for the green environment. So let's call them just NS blue and NS green. And then we need to select our artifact, which in our case is the Kubernetes manifest. And after all that, we need to give it the nginx ingress name that we have defined in our deployment. So I think it was like so. This is the ingress name that was defined in the manifest. And then again, we've got the validation and approval controls if we want to enable them or not. And with this, we have created our stage. And since we already have the manifest and the container, we can also, run the pipeline. And then to see what a Canary pipeline looks like on Kubernetes, let's create a test pipeline. And here we add a stage Canary strategy and the deployment type Kubernetes. So again, we need to select an environment, and then we need to give it a namespace. So let's say this is called NS Canary. And then again, we need to select our artifact, which is our manifest, and give it the ingress controller name. So now, yes, inc. Then again, we've got the validation controls, which we have seen previously. The traffic shift is exactly the same as when you would do it on an instance group. So traffic shift and 20%. Then the approval stage with one approval, and then the production Canary, where we need to give it the production namespace. So here we'll call it production deployment. And the production NS, or like NS, whatever. It doesn't matter. And then we can do an automatic rollback if we want to roll back to the last successful version. And then it would create all of these for us, all of these stages. And this is pretty much everything that I had to show you. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time right now to also run a test on to run the deployment pipelines themselves. But if you want to see that, to see what it would look like, I can do a separate video for you and just post it to the Slack channel that Violeta has presented to you at the beginning of the cloud coaching session, and you can just check that there. But I think this should be pretty straightforward, and if you have used before like any CICD tools of this sort, you should be probably familiar with all the topics that we have covered here, because these are pretty general. It's just that it maybe looks different within the Oracle Cloud interface, but it should be more or less the same as you are used to. So that was it on my end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liana.
Stop sharing now.
With that, I would like to close this this call and to thank you all for attending this session. Thank you, Liana, for presenting. It was great having you here again. And of course, we are waiting you on upcoming events. Thank you and have a great day. Don't forget that you can always email us, as Tom mentioned, at the email address you see on the screen. And of course, you can always reach out to us on public Slack. Thank you and have a great day.